Aha, we're back. Okay, so now for round 2. This is going to be super easy because all you're going to be doing is taking everything out and rinsing it and then letting it dry. Now, the biggest thing that I found with rinsing and doing the whole thing is when you take your project out of the pot, it's going to be warm because the water's still going to be hot, even though it's been 30 minutes, which is another reason I kind of like to do mine on the stove, because I like to keep my water a little bit warm. But regardless, so what we're going to do is look over the biggest things that I have found. I have found that when you remove this and you rinse it and everything else, the biggest thing that I find that people do is to get the dye out of it, they like to wring it. You do not want to wring it because it stretches the fibers out and causes a little bit of damage to your project. So you don't want to wring anything. If anything, you want to squish it up into a ball and kind of squeeze. So do not wring anything out. Okay, so let's move the stool over here because I'm short and the camera won't go up there very well. So this is, change this camera around. This has been setting for the 30 minutes, and I was just checking the color. It wasn't setting out of the water that whole time. So anyway, it's been sitting in there for the 30 minutes. Now what you're going to do is you're going to lift your project out, and the water's going to run. And as you can see, we still have a good bit of dye in there. So this is the color that we got, and like I said, it ultimately, you can kind of see the bubbles on there, but it is much darker in person than this is. So this is after letting it sit for the 30 minutes. Now what you're going to do is you're going to kind of take this and let it kind of drip for a few seconds. And then I like to take it out and put it in another pan. Now, once you have that done, you're going to take this and we're going to go over to the sink. And you can open this up. Like I said, even just touching this way, you're not going to, it's not dyeing. Like, you get dye on your fingers from the Rit dye thing, it kind of will dye. This, as long as your hands aren't like in it, it's not like I'm touching this and you can see like my fingers aren't colored. So anyway, what you're going to do is you're going to take your project and you're going to put it in that pan. And as you can see here, it looks much darker over here than it was over there because of the lighting. It's kind of a combination of the two. So now what we're going to do is we are going to turn our cold water on, and you're going to let that pan fill up with the cold water because you're going to want the cold water to rinse what you're doing. So we're going to let that fill up with some cold water. So does anybody have any questions so far? Like I said, this is pretty straightforward. So ask away, and I can see the comments now. So as you can see, filling this up with cold water, of course my fingers are wet, you can see a little bit of the dye coming out the back here. You will not have a whole lot of dye come out. I know it looks like, you know, a lot, but it's not. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this and you're just going to kind of move it around in the water. And like I said, at this point, if you wanted to wear gloves, you could, but you're really not going to dye anything. The only time that I really do that is if I'm working with black. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take and squish out some of that dye. And then fill your pan up again. And do the same thing. And you're going to do this about, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. The water will start to get clearer as it sets. I like to use pretty cold water for this myself. And I do find that if you're dyeing cotton that has the use of the salt in it, the salt seems to bleed a little bit more when you're rinsing than the actual one when you're using the vinegar. And like I said, ultimately this only takes a few minutes for you to be able to dye. You can do a pretty good batch in probably like an hour and a half in the morning. I want to say I've pretty much done batches of, I think I did, the biggest batch I ever did was like 200 washcloths in like 5 hours in the morning. Let's turn you around here. Okay, so, it's hard to hold my phone and do this too. So, after you have your water run in there and it's going to start to get, the color is going to start to get lighter and lighter. You want to pick your project up, and that's what I was saying. You do not want to take your project and wring it. You want to kind of squeeze. And like I said, when you squeeze, you'll see there's still, there's still going to be some soap in your project from when you added it to the water in the first place, and you too. So, like I said, with the cotton, I find that you kind of got to do it a little bit more as far as rinsing goes. And Rit dye does make a color setting for cotton that I do like it, especially for the cotton. I don't seem to need it for yarns that have the nylon in it. The yarns that are like the superwash and stuff, when they're dyed with the vinegar, I don't seem like I need that dye setter in it as much as you would for the cotton. But like I said, what you're going to do is you're going to continue to rinse this thing, and the smaller, I like a smaller pot because you can fill it up and rinse a little bit better. You can get an idea of the clarity of the water. And I pretty much, like I said, with the cotton, the water's going to be pretty clear. It's not going to be like, you're not going to get super, super clear water. But, like I said, make sure you squeeze. Do not wring, squeeze. But, and I don't know if you can tell, but that's the emerald color that we got from the dye. So we did get a pretty good color in the background of emerald, which is another reason that I like the Rit dye. So now I've rinsed this probably 4 or 5 times. And the water is still a little blue, but it's not super blue. And like I said, when you squeeze, you're going to get more color out too that way. So a lot of times, like I said, I like to press more than squeeze until I'm about done. But water's cold here. So does anybody have any questions about what we're doing so far? Just to recap, we pulled our washcloth out of the dye. We let it drip for a few seconds, and then we put it into another pan. And then we have run it through, I want to say, like I said, with cotton, 6 or 7 times. Let me get my, where's my hand towel at? And like I said, I'm doing this without gloves, and you can see, like, my fingernails or nothing else. My fingers are red from the water being so cold, but as you can see here now, let's turn this around. The water's pretty clear. And you'll still have a little bit of tinge that'll still come out until the first kind of wash that you do. But once your water is light enough, then you can squeeze this out, and then you can lay this either flat to dry, or you can lay it so that you're going to block it, or whatever you're going to do. But, and like, you still will get a little bit of dye out, especially with cotton. But as you can see, my water is pretty clean from here. It's got a little bit of blue in it, but you're not going to have a whole lot. I know that looks like a lot because it was in the corner of the pan. Okay, so let's turn you back around. Cooperate with me a little bit there, phone. Okay, so now you have got your washcloth. It's been rinsed. You can take this and roll it in a rag to get the excess water out. I squeeze mine out probably once or twice. I squeeze it out real good, as hard as you can. And then you can take this and roll it in a rag to get more of your water out. You can roll it in paper towels. You can roll it in whatever you want. I have an old rag, an old dish towel that I use. And this poor thing has been through so much stuff. And all you're going to do is fold your washcloth, fold your fabric over it, and then roll real tight. And it'll absorb more of that water out of there. And even though I used a darker towel, you can, I don't know if you can see it, but this is pretty stained up, but there's no dye in here. This is still purple. It's just wet. This didn't turn it green or anything like that. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take your washcloth up and put it on your blocking board, or however you choose to let your project dry, depending on what it's going to be used for. Some people like to take it and just hang them to dry. Some people like to block them at this point. So it's just going to depend on what your use is. Is this something that's for your house that really doesn't need blocked, that you were just learning a new stitch? So it's just going to depend on what you want to do with it, what it's being used for. So let's see here. This is actually being used for my house and not going anywhere. So for me, we're just going to give it a a couple little tugs, and mine are corners up. And then that's how it's going to lay flat to dry. I had a knot here, and like I said, since this wasn't going to anybody's house but just for here, I left it. But there is our washcloth with our stitch, and let's see, I don't know if you can really see you're not kind of going to be able to see the pattern as much, but these little lines that go across are from the knit stitch. And then, let's see if I can turn it. It kind of has like almost like a waffle look. And you can see the knit stitches. And then the TSS is here, and then the knit stitch, the TSS, and then the knit stitch. And like I said, mine will lay there until it is dry, and then you can do whatever you want with it. I will weave my tails in after that, and this will be staying with me, so I don't have to worry about doing anything else but weaving my tails in. So that was pretty quick and painless. Does anybody have any questions about anything? An 8-ounce bottle of Rit dye will last you a long time. If you're dyeing smaller batches, and even, you know, the t-shirts and things like that, if you want to dye those, you can dye those too. Skeins of yarn, I like to take those and put them in a hank on the Swift and then dye that way. Or you can actually take your hanks and when you have a hank and you want to dye different colors, because as much as those hanks are pretty for knitting, you when you unwrap them, you get the variegated yarn. So if you dyed like one end blue, the center you left white, and you dyed the other end black, then as you're working with it, you're going to have just small sections of color. But if you do that and you decide to wrap your hank differently, I like to take my hank and start to take it off and wrap it with another Swift, or separate it into a, on the yarn winder, I like to wind it and then wrap part of it on the hank winder, the Swift, and then take that and section that off, and then put this hank in the center of the Swift and wrap another section a bunch of times and then mark that off. So, and then I end up with 3 sections, and then you can dye each of those 3 sections separately. And if you do that, then you're going to have the long, really long color changes. So, I mean, it's just going to depend on what you want for your project. And 2, if you do that, you also can add the yarn for your project. If you did the 3 separate hanks like I'm talking about, I have done that where I add the first section of yarn and then I let it set in the water for about 20 minutes, and then I add, you know, and move that around and keep those 2 sections out, and then I add my second section in and dye that, and that will pick up some more of the dye, but it won't be quite as dark as the first section, and I let that set for about 30 minutes, and then I do the third one, and with it absorbing dye out of the water, it will give you an ombre skein of yarn when you're done. So when you're done, and then you bring it over and then you rinse it. After you rinse it, I do hang mine to dry. Once you hang those to dry, I kind of hang mine, I have like over the door or over the door hanger, and I hang all 3 sections, and I let those hang. And then after I feel like the top has kind of dried some, then I go and I flip those. And then once that's dry, if you take that and then take that back up and then cut your yarn off, and then do that one section first, and then your second section, and then your third section on the yarn swift, or your yarn winder, then you'll have a cake or a hank that goes from darkest to lightest or lightest to darkest, depending on what end you started with. And I really do like that because I prefer the longer color changes. I mean, that's me. I do have yarns here that have the shorter color changes. And, and honestly, those are probably the ones that I will never use. um, but, yeah, so like I said, if you've had a manicure or whatever, and you know, I would say to use gloves because you do get some dye on your hands from this, and the salt kind of dries your hands out a little bit, but it's not a lot. And it depends on how much you're going to be dyeing too. The days that I do like 40-50 washcloths from having your hands in it, it will color your fingernails after a while. But all my dyeing stuff stays separate from my food stuff, and I have a little section in the basement where everything goes when I'm done with it. All the RIT dyes in a box, and all my stuff for dyeing, and everything all goes together. So hopefully, if you guys got questions, I'll see them in a few minutes because for some reason they're really not showing up here. But that's it. When this is going to dry, and then when I see you guys during the next live that I have, which is going to be 2 Wednesdays from now, not this Wednesday, but the Wednesday after, when I do that live, I will show you the dried washcloth and what it looks like, and answer any questions that you have during that. And if you're rewatching this, don't hesitate to ask underneath, and I will be checking the comments of the tea cow periodically too. So I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in here whenever you need me. So all right, guys, have a good day. Bye.